We're going to meet in the computer lab on Thursday. So our next class meeting will be back in here as well. And I'll give you on Thursday our next homework assignment, homework 11. We're going to start on a new chapter today. Replacement and retention decisions is chapter 11 of our book. And so the in-class exercise we're going to do today is called Economic Service Life. And the idea there is trying to figure out how long until you replace an item. So let's talk about that, replacing things. Just as a side note, it's interesting when you come back to the UAE after being away for a while. I was out of the UAE for I think 6 or 7 years. And you come back and lots of things are new. And lots of stores have been totally refurbished. And so people here always like something new and exciting because it seems like every weekend there's a new mall being opened or a new store in the mall, like, you know, the new Apple store and everything. And so change is really a big part of living here in the UAE. And so this is kind of pertinent to the local conditions because things get replaced a lot. There's always refurbishing decisions and things that are new. So when should you replace something? The first situation that you may find yourself in is when an item is starting to wear out and it's exhibiting reduced performance. And so that could be, for example, a vehicle that's starting to break down. And so if you have to take it to the repair shop so many times that it's interrupting your work or it's ruining your weekend to have a car broken down by the side of the road, that may be an instance where you have to replace the item. It may be that the item isn't broken, but maybe there's a risk of a safety. Airplanes, over the long term, can develop small cracks in the wings and in the fuselage. When they go up and down, the constant pressurization and depressurization can cause very small cracks inside the material of an airplane, and there's a risk of failure. And so usually airplanes are retired before they get to the point where there's a big safety risk. It could be that the item is starting to have more rejected, whatever it's producing. If it's a machine that is working in a factory, maybe as it gets older it has a higher rate of failure. So whatever the case may be, one reason we would replace an item is because it's not performing as well as it used to. A second possibility is that the requirements for the job have changed. And in the textbook it mentions the idea of furnaces and how different types of materials applications require progressively hotter and hotter furnaces. For example, a blast furnace that's used to smelt steel doesn't need as high a temperature as the furnaces that are used for ceramic applications or for graphite fiber applications. And so as industries mature, it may be that a piece of equipment just simply isn't keeping up with what needs to be done in the future. And somewhat related to that is the idea of obsolescence. Now, think about an old computer. It may still work and still do the things that it was originally designed for, but because the competing technology has advanced so much further, it would make you less competitive to have the same piece of equipment. And this is a picture of an old Apple computer. It's the Apple IIe. And actually, when I was in high school, this is the computer that people would use for typing papers or learning how to do programming. It's essentially ancient now. It's a museum piece. And so if you were still trying to be very thrifty and frugal because you didn't want to spend money on a new computer and you were using this, then you wouldn't be able to do spreadsheets, you wouldn't be able to use the internet, you wouldn't be able to send email. And so the equipment itself isn't losing its functionality, but the person using it has a reduced functionality because the item is obsolete. So these are possibilities when it may be time to replace an item. What we're going to be looking at today is mainly performance reduction and how that affects the decision of when to replace an item. The process that we're going to go through today requires us to understand some key terms. And we've identified the idea of defender and challenger when we were looking at incremental analysis. The defender is where you start with. And in the case of a replacement analysis, it's the item that you already own. Since you have it, it's defending the position of the item that's used. The challenger is, among all of the possible replacements, the one that is best. So you have to do a little bit of analysis before the replacement analysis just to find out what's the best potential replacement. I hear lots of mouse clicking right now. You shouldn't be doing anything other than watching the lecture. We will have another exam after the one that you've just done, and this material is going to be on it. Market value is, if you're going to sell the Defender, it's how much the Defender is worth if it's sold on the open market. Economic service life is what we're going to find out today at the end of our analysis. It's how long you should own an item before it's replaced. And the way that you know how long to own it is you look at a cost curve that's generated, and you find the lowest cost. It's the number of years associated with the lowest annual cost. The Defender, when you do the analysis, you have to assume a first cost of the Defender. And this is an important one because the first cost that you use in analysis for the Defender is not how much the Defender actually cost when you initially purchased it. Actually, the Defender first cost that you use is the current market value of the Defender if you sold it today. Because when you're doing the replacement study analysis, you don't look into the past. It doesn't matter how much you spent on the Defender. You're starting now, and all that matters is what should you do in the future moving forward. You have to ignore what are called sunk costs. Sunk costs are things like, think about if you were selling a car, and 6 months ago you put on new brakes, and 2 months before that you put in a new transmission, and then 2 months before that you had to get a new paint job. The person buying the car doesn't care about all the maintenance that you've done. That's your problem, not theirs. They only care what's right in front of them, which is a car. How good is it? In your mind, you have to dismiss all of the previous expenses that you've had and not include them in the study. Although it's hard to do, it's an emotional thing when you've got a lot of money invested in a piece of equipment. You have to be sort of rational about it. So the Defender first cost is only the current market value of the item. Mm-hmm. We can find the price today by looking at similar items that are available on the market. So if you're selling a 2005 Toyota Hilux, for example, you don't look at what you paid for it to know how much it's worth. You would go to Gulf News Cars or Dubizzle or whatever. You go to the car market and see what other people are buying that vehicle for, because your analysis, maybe it would be accurate, maybe it wouldn't, but how much that car is actually worth is determined only by what other people are willing to pay for it. So that's the most accurate way to know what an item is worth, is just to find out what exact other replacements like it are being sold for. Here's what we're going to generate in our analysis today, a curve. The blue line is the sum of the two black lines. And so let's think about, this is one of those pictures where I could ask you to tell me a story about this curve. And I'd want you to explain what it is and what it means. And so on the horizontal axis, on the x-axis here is time. It's a number of years. And then on the vertical axis is costs in terms of dollars per year. All right. So first of all, let's look at the capital recovery line. And what it means is, how long did you own the item, and what is the annual cost of how long you owned the item? So let's take the car, for example. If you buy a new SUV and only own it 1 year, the cost per year is going to be very high. Every year you get a new car, then the capital recovery will be quite high. And capital recovery takes two factors into account. It takes into account the price that you paid and the market value. So both of those things are already considered. If you own a car for a long time, the capital recovery is low because you're spreading out the cost of the vehicle over many years. So this first curve, I hope, is obvious why the trend is the way it is. If you don't own a car very much, then the annual cost of owning that car is going to be very high. Now what about AOC means annual operating costs. Can you think of why the operating costs would be going up if you own it for a number of years? Yes, it's maintenance. Okay, that could be a possibility. Do you have another idea? Uh-huh. Okay. So the functionality, and you said fix it. Right. Think about when you own a car for 1 year only, you're not spending much on maintenance because it's still in good condition. But if you own a car for 10 years, that's when it starts to break down a lot. It's like magic. As soon as it gets old, it starts to be in the repair shop so many times, and so the annual operating costs become high. So the perfect amount of years to own it is when you minimize the cost, when you have the minimum total of annual operating expenses and capital recovery. So your criteria for the analysis at the end of the spreadsheet, we're going to make a spreadsheet today. At the end of the spreadsheet, you're looking at the total cost column, and you want to find the lowest total cost. And that tells you how many years to own the item before you sell it. Okay. On iLearn is a spreadsheet file. Go to iLearn. I'll show you the location of it. If you go to iLearn for CVE 267 and then to the lecture notes folder, and then other items folder, here is ICE 28 Excel file. Capital recovery? It's because the longer you own the item, the cheaper the cost is per year. So think about if you buy a new car every 10 years, the new car costs 100,000 dirhams, so the cost per year would be low. But if you buy a new car every 2 years, that's 100,000 dirhams every 2 years. And so the cost per year is going to be much larger. Does everyone have ICE 28 file, the Excel file? Everybody find that okay? Good, good, all right. Here's the process we're going to go through. We're going to do it together. So we have in this example, what we know is right now an item is, it has a first cost of $20,000. What that means is we don't know if we're buying it now or maybe it's a used item with a current market value of $20,000. It doesn't matter. Just right now when we begin our analysis, the value or the cost of the item is $20,000. And the reason why we have negative here is it's a cost rather than a revenue. The market values, you'll notice that those are positive because that represents a cash flow back to you when you sell the item. So MV stands for market value. Here in column C, we have the operating costs for the item in the year that it's given. So in year 1, we have to pay $5,000 to operate the item. And why is it getting more expensive every year to operate the item? Because it's breaking, it's breaking down more. So the technician has to come more often to get the item calibrated. Just the maintenance required to keep the item in operation is going up. I'll have to point out that these amounts are for only the year that it's listed here. And so year 1, it's $5,000 in year 1. For 2, it's $6,500 in year 2. Certain year is the key thing here. It's the year of the row that it's on. This isn't an average over all of the years. That's just for the year that it's on that row. Yes? MV stands for market value. It's the, if you were going to sell this item, whatever it is, actually I think on the paper it says it's a piece of equipment, so that's nice and vague. This piece of equipment, if you buy it in year 0, you pay $20,000, and then if you sell it in year 1, you can receive $10,000 for selling it. And the market value is getting lower and lower each year that you wait. And in the end, after 5 years, this item is worth nothing. I guess because nobody wants to buy something that's breaking down so often. It has a really high repair cost. All right, other questions before we start into the calculations? All right, here's what we're going to do. For column D, we want to know how much do we have to spend on a cumulative basis to own the item for a certain number of years. So if we only own the item for 1 year, our operating costs up until the end of that year is only going to be $5,000. So you can just do equals and the cell next to it, enter. And the costs are negative because that's an outflow to our business. It's an amount that has to be spent. But there's a problem with this, and that is we want to know the present value of the cumulative operating costs. And $5,000 is in year 1. So we want to take that $5,000 to year 0. Our interest rate is 10%. It would be easy to take $5,000 to year 0 because we know there is the PV function, but we're going to be finding the PV for the cumulative amounts. And so instead of doing the PV function, it's going to be equals NPV, the rate that we're using. You can highlight I, and then the value is going to be just this year 1. Okay, so now 4,545, that's the value of the item in year 0. So we're taking this 5,000 in year 1 and we're discounting it to year 0. What? Mm-hmm. We only put it as what? There isn't a year 0. Year 1, what that means is the first year that the item is in operation. So we don't have a row that says 0 because there isn't a 0th year. There's a first year, a second year, a third year, and so on. So year 1 is the first year that the item's in operation. Okay, now this is where it gets a little bit tricky for the next one. So the present value of the cumulative operating costs, the way that we're going to do it is equals NPV, and the rate is the same, and then we're going to highlight the range. Oh, I didn't get that rate. Okay, so let me go back. Rate, comma, and then highlight the range. And close it and enter. So what that does is it takes the 5,000 from year 1 and discounts it to year 0, and then it takes the 6,500 and discounts that from year 2 and takes it to year 0, and then adds those two amounts together. All right? We'll have to do the same thing. Unfortunately, we can't just drag the formula down. That wouldn't work because our range is expanding. So we have to type the formula in manually for all 5 years. So equals NPV, click on the rate, comma, highlight the 3 operating costs, equals NPV, the rate, comma, highlight 4 operating costs, and so on. because this is in year 1 and this is the value in year 0. So we've moved it back in time, discounted it. No, just think about if you have 5,000 in year 1, what is it worth a year before year 1? It'll be less. If you put $4,545 in the bank and it earns 10% interest, then in 1 year it will be worth 5,000. So if you go forward in time, it's worth more. If you go backward in time, it's worth less. So the next one, that's the sum of this taken 2 years backwards and this taken 1 year backwards. Okay, so just to summarize, this 30,000, what is that amount? 30,178 is the value if you take 12,500 back in time 5 years. So you take it from year 5 to year 0. You take the 9,500, you take it from year 4 to year 0. Each of these you take back in time, however many years it takes to get it to year 0, and then add them together. That's what this cell means for each of the rows that we're on. So it's the present value of the operating costs to date. All right. Now the annual worth of the operating costs. Remember, column D, these are all amounts in year 0. So what we need to do in E is find the annual equivalent of this for however many years we've got. Do you know what function to use to find an annual payment when you have a present value? PMT. Right. So we're going to do equals PMT. And the rate, we can click on where the I is. This time we should anchor it by clicking F4, and that puts in the dollar signs. Okay, N is going to be whatever row we're on, so 1, 2, 3, etc. And then this is the present value, and we have to put in the negative sign, I think. Let's see, negative sign, otherwise it will flip it. Okay. So what you can see is that if you take 4,545 from 0 and you take it only to year 1, it's going to be back to the 5,000. That seems a little bit confusing for that one. But drag it down for the rest of them and I think it'll make more sense. As you see, what it's doing is it's spreading the operating costs over all of the number of years equally. So let me draw a cash flow diagram just to illustrate what we've done so far. All right, for the operating costs, we know that it was going to cost in year 1, it was 5,000. Year 2 was 6,500. Year 3 was 8,000. Year 4, 9,500. And then year 5 is 12,500. Okay. In this column, what we did in column D was we take it from whatever year it's in to year 0. So if you take 5,000 to year 0, it will be less. And so that's what 4,545 is. This 9,917 is what if you take year 1 and year 2 to 0, and so on. Okay, now the annual operating cost is we're trying to make it even. So for example, 7,961, that would be the annual equivalent of all of these together. So if you want to average it out, so every year it's the same amount for all of the expenses, rather than having a different amount of expenses every year, you're trying to level the expenses, then it would be 7,961 each year. All right. Now the annual worth of the first cost, again we're going to do the PMT function. So equals PMT, and we'll click on the rate. Use the anchoring because we're going to drag it down and we want it always to look at the rate. With a comma for the N is whatever row you're on for the years. And then our first cost was in the present. So the present value would be negative of this first cost. And we put in the negative sign just so that it doesn't get flipped. So it's 22,000 because you're taking it from year 0 to year 1 at 10% interest. And then if you drag that down through, you're annualizing. Oh, I didn't anchor something, it looks like. Yes, the first cost. Thank you. Okay, here we go. Click F4. It puts in the dollar signs. And now drag it down through. So the annual worth of the fixed cost is basically if you're spreading the purchase price out over a number of equal payments, how much is each of those payments? So if you spread it out over one payment, if you want to pay at the end of year 1, then you owe $22,000 because it was originally $20,000, but it has gained interest over time. If you want to spread it out over 2 years, you find the payment to spread out the first cost over 2 years, and so on. We're going to use the same approach for the market value, the annual worth of the market value. So it's going to be the payment function again, equals PMT. Our rate will be this 10%. N will be whatever row we're on. And then the market value, should that be in the PV area or the FV area? It's a future value. It's the value of if you sell it in the year in question. And so I'm going to put in another set of commas to take the function away from the PV, and now it's expecting something in the FV. So now I'll put the negative and click on the market value. All right. So if you're spreading out the salvage value over however many years of ownership is represented by this row, this is the annual worth of the market value. Instead of taking it all at once, what if you spread the value annually? All right, so the annual worth of cost and market value is going to simply be the sum of the two. So equals the cost and the market value. Yeah.
Annual worth of the first cost.
Right.
Which one?
It's the sum of those two. So it's not the PMT function. It's just equals that plus that. Okay, the next column, in column I, it's going to blow your mind, this function. Yeah, CR stands for capital recovery. This is an alternate method. So we're going to get the same values as we did in column H, but it's a trick. Actually, it's something I didn't know you could do. I just learned it yesterday, a new trick. So you're getting it, huh? You've done it before? All right, so watch this. You can put in both the market value and the future. You can put in the future value and the first cost at the same time. So equals PMT, and our rate is going to still always be this 10%. Okay, the N is whatever row we are on. All right, now it's expecting the present value, so here let's click on the present value, and we have to anchor that because the present value isn't changing. So push F4 so that it gets the dollar signs. And oh, that's right, it needs to be negative. So let me put in the negative so that we get the signs we need them. And then FV is going to be this market value, negative of the market value. All right, so simultaneously it's keeping track of both the market value and the first cost. And it gives you the same amount. So basically it saves you from having to do F, G, and H. You can do it all together at the same. Oh wait, yeah, it gets you the same. Mm-hmm. Okay, for the alternate method, you shouldn't skip over that cell. You should put in the, this is the PV, and then the FV will be the market value. Okay, let me do the alternate method again. Let me clear it, and so you can see what this alternate method is, okay? What we're saying is equals PMT, and the rate is our same 10% that it has always been. N will be whatever row we are on. For the PV, it was this first cost, and I'm anchoring it by pressing F4. Oh, and I forgot the negative sign. There it is. And now, comma, and the FV is going to be the negative of our market value, because that is the salvage that we can sell it for. So those are the 4 parameters, and if you push enter then drag it down, it fills the formula for each of the rows. All right. Column J is the total of the cost, so it's E plus I. So the annual operating costs plus the capital recovery, or column H, since the amounts are the same. There's only 2 things. It's J equals E plus I. So the total costs are the operating costs and the capital recovery. Capital recovery takes into account the difference between the purchase price and the salvage. And so you're taking the difference between those two and spreading it out over however many years it is for the row in question. So now let's remind ourselves, what is the number of years? This was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many years is the optimum amount of years to own this item for? 3 years is the best. If we own it 2 years, the price is higher because we have a high capital recovery. If we own it for 4 years, the price is higher because the operations and maintenance cost is going up, the annual operating expenses. So 3 is sort of that perfect balance of not too much capital recovery and not too much operating costs. Yes? How can you predict the maintenance? Right. I guess the way to predict it, there are some magazines, like there's a magazine in the US called Consumer Reports, and they do things like they look at previous car models and how much it has been in the shop, like a reliability analysis, and so you could use that sort of data. You could talk to people who have, like if you're thinking of buying a 2015 Honda Accord, you could talk to someone who owns a 2010 Honda Accord and see how often it goes to the shop and so on. You'd want a lot of data to make it more than just anecdotal. You wouldn't want just to only talk to one person because maybe they have an unlucky car or a lucky car. Yeah, there's a lot of assumptions that may go into it. You can request a service history. Another way to do it is some dealerships will sell you a package. Like, you know when you first buy a car, maybe it includes 3 years of full maintenance. Sometimes it's a 5 years of full maintenance. Well, some dealerships will sell you an extension on that. They'll say, you know, if you give me 5,000 dirhams, then I'll give you 1 additional year of free maintenance. Well, then that tells you what the annual maintenance cost is for that additional year. All right, so that's it for today. Basically, what we've done is called an economic service life analysis. And it's the procedure you go through to find out the number of years you should own an item, and then after 3 years, you should sell the item, because it's starting to lose market value, and it's starting to increase too much in operating costs after that. So it tells you when an item should be replaced. There's really not anything for you to fill in on the in-class exercise other than your name. So please write your name on the paper and set it on the chair on your way out. I'll see you on Thursday. We're meeting again in the same computer lab classroom, so I'll see you then.